Hello, my name is Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this Wednesday evening, June 14th West Weather Update, brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. To start, I thought I'd show you the development of the historic Tulare Lake bed that we've been talking about all spring. This is flooding that has occurred. What really started with the atmospheric river event that we saw in March in California, the kind of onslaught of these low-pressure systems bringing rain to the coastline, rain in the Central Valley, snow, of course, in the Sierra Nevadas. That really piled up into this kind of historic lake bed, which was dry to start the year. This loop that you're looking at, this is the satellite imagery from Sentinel. We've been kind of reviewing their data, their images all spring, keeping track of this. This compiles those all together. It starts about mid-February. You can see it accelerate the flooding there in March. This is a large area. Twitter user here, Simon Gascoigne, shout out him putting this together. It's very cool, neat, cool video. But it's a big area, and I wanted to kind of give you a perspective or some context. This is that same lake bed. This was taken just a few days ago from the Sentinel satellite data set. It looks, like it might be just a few agricultural fields flooded here in the San Joaquin Valley in Southern California. But if I just compare Seattle, kind of that same size reference based on the two maps here, you could see that the Seattle kind of proper city or downtown area would easily fit in this lake bed, even potentially a few of the suburbs here, Bellevue, one of the larger suburbs to the east, the Puget Sound just to the west here, in comparison to what is a really large flooded area now in the San Joaquin Valley. It doesn't look it, I know in some of these pictures, but if you look closely, there's even some of these maybe more typically sized agricultural fields just to the east here, so you can get a sense for really how big this area is that has flooded. I will say, fortunately, we haven't seen extreme catastrophic flooding elsewhere. I think part of that has been the cool temperatures we've been talking about. At least for the last 6 weeks, we've avoided kind of melting all that anomalous snowfall that we got in March and April all at once, and that's certainly good news. But I can't say the same for the Tulare Lake bed. It's just a very large area covered in some water at this point. If we take a look over at the reservoir situation across California, last week we talked about some of the other ones. I wanted to focus a little bit more on California here today. Pretty much full across the board. I mean, it did not look like this going into the winter earlier in 2022, kind of near the end of the year as the water year got going. If we look at some of the larger ones, Oroville, Shasta, San Luis, essentially full. Those are largely rain-fed reservoirs, A lot of the rain we had earlier this year filling up those reservoirs. They've been releasing water there to account for some of this. If we come down the Sierra Nevadas, talk about like New Melones, Don Pedro, McClure, Pine Flat, Success, Millerton, all the way through the southern, kind of into the Sierras there. Those have been filling up a little bit slower. Those are more snow-fed reservoirs, but even some of those now at least getting up toward average or even above average in the case of New Melones. So reservoirs coming up across the board in California, not a surprise given the very wet water year we had in 2023, just kind of a result of that. But avoiding large issues, I think in terms of catastrophic flooding that we were maybe a little bit concerned with coming in to that melt season here. And just getting an update on that melt, again, just to recap, this blue line here is looking at snow water equivalent held up in that California snowpack for this year, the 2022-2023 water year. That red line is the last kind of big record maximum in 1983, and you can see really kind of close to that as we were this year in 2022 and 2023 for our water year. The light blue line is what we get in California in average year. This year, I just totally blew that away in terms of snow water equivalent. But you can see now we're here in kind of May, June, getting into mid-June. We have melted through much of that anomalous snowpack to the point where it looks like we're quite low on this graphic here, but just about across the board, across the Sierra Nevadas and California, we've only melted through about 50% of a normal snowpack in California, or I should say we have about 50% left of a normal typical year's winter snowpack to melt through. So we're not done with the water yet coming down out of the mountains. We have melted through a good portion of that. If we strictly look just over the last 30 days of rainfall, I want to kind of catch us up on the water situation more recently. I think the big story here has been dryness in the Pacific Northwest, certainly for the Willamette Valley up through the SeaTac metro area and even extending all the way over into eastern Washington. This hasn't been as big of a story, I think, in the Central Valley, given all the water we had earlier in 2023, but some areas in the north, the Willamette, parts of Oregon, parts of Washington, are drying out a bit, and the soils are reflecting that. If we jump over and look at the latest drought monitor released at the end of last week, We do have some moderate drought classifications which have been introduced in the upper Willamette Valley here. You can see the Willamette River Valley kind of hiding here on this map, and now really the southern end, or the upper Willamette Valley, in official drought classification, albeit D1, the lowest drought classification. Some of that dryness extending to the east and central and eastern Oregon, parts of northern Idaho, kind of lingering dryness in parts of western Washington. I'm keeping an eye on this area, both in the forecast, looking at some of the upcoming rainfall. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But just kind of given the summer trends, given some relationship with El Niño where we see less water, not a huge correlation there, but it's enough to kind of have me concerned long-term, keeping an eye on drought in this area. If we jump ahead, kind of look out into the forecast. The big story with the forecast right now is less, in fact, about water, I think, initially. Certainly more in terms of temperature. We've cooled down finally across the Pacific Northwest, really the whole, I would say, the northern western region of the United States, extending east into parts of western Montana, Idaho, eastern Oregon, even parts of Nevada. We've cooled off these areas that were previously, over the last 4 weeks or so, quite a bit warmer than average. Have brought some cold fronts through. The picture you're looking at now, this is the NDFD, or the National Weather Service, forecasted temperature anomaly for each day, and I'm going to take you out really over the next 6 to 7 days here. These kind of blue-green colors are showing you that we are below normal in terms of that forecasted daily high temperature. This one here, this map looking, is Wednesday the 14th, so this is valid for today, and you can see colder than an average forecast high temperatures for much of the northern interior west, even extending down to the south where we've had that same story for quite a while, cooler weather in the southern half of that western region. If I take this out to Thursday the 15th, some of that cold weather extending off to the east, we get back to more seasonal temperatures across parts of Washington, Oregon, and California. Southern California, unfortunately, especially along the coast, still socked in with that May gray, which has felt, like it's lasted for months at this point for some of the cities down there. Take this through Friday. We do bring some warmth back to the picture, particularly for Northern California, parts of Oregon, and Washington. Saturday is starting to cool off in the Pacific Northwest, but the big day in terms of temperatures and really the whole weather pattern in terms of the forecast over the next 7 days is going to be Sunday, where about midday we're expecting a big cold front and low pressure system to push into the area, starting on the Pacific Northwest, making its way south into Northern California, east into Idaho. By kind of that Sunday PM time frame, temperatures will be falling as a result of that. We'll get into what exactly that will look like in terms of actual Fahrenheit measurements, but we're certainly kind of well down that color bar now, just in terms of that anomaly or that departure from average for mid-June here. Take this into Monday. Monday morning, I think, will really kind of be the coldest day for much of these states here. Eastern Oregon, parts of south central Idaho, Washington, even Northern California and Nevada. Monday morning, what we're looking at now in that 7 to 10 day forecast for the lowest overnight temperatures. Into Tuesday, that extends just a bit off to the east as that low pressure system, that upper level trough, kind of sits over the western region. We've reached the end of the NDFD forecast here out at 6 days. I'll take a look over here. We'll jump ahead. This is looking now at that absolute forecast overnight low on Monday and Tuesday. You'll notice that Monday for the Willamette Valley dropping into the mid 40s, parts of eastern Washington below that, possibly even into the low 40s, along some of these river valleys staying into the mid or upper 40s. Taking a look over at the Snake River Valley, mid to upper 40s here. If I jump this over to Tuesday, I mentioned that cold weather kind of shifting to the east Tuesday morning. Now we're into the low 40s, cold enough, not where we're kind of sounding the alarms in terms of frost for some areas here in the Snake River Valley, but it's kind of on our radar at this point. Given that we're 5 to 6 days out, that's enough time for the forecast to shift, perhaps even a little bit colder. Not sounding the alarm by any means, but something we'll have to keep an eye on over the next few days. Certainly an area like the Willamette Valley, certainly the Central Valley of California, not worried about frost with this event, but it will be colder, pretty cold nights on tap early next week, starting after that cold front comes through Sunday PM. If we look at 7-day temperature anomalies, given the story that we just talked about, right, not surprising that temperatures are going to be low across the board, across the West. We've been cold, right, in that southern region due to some colder sea surface temperatures off the coast of California and Mexico. We're introducing that cold weather. It's really already started in parts of the northern west region, getting another more amplified shot of that on Sunday PM through early next week. If we take a look at what this story looks like just in terms of precipitation, we talked about temperatures first. I think there is a story here for precipitation, particularly for some of those dry areas I talked about in the Pacific Northwest. This is looking at Wednesday afternoon here, valid on June 14th, some Intermountain West shower and thunderstorm activity off in Nevada and Utah. That's going to kind of be exiting the area. We talked about some kind of that persistent PM shower and storm activity, not seeing as much of that over the next 6 to 7 days here. The story in terms of precipitation really starts when that front comes through, that low pressure system associated with it on Sunday, really about lunchtime Sunday, getting through Saturday here in this ECMWF forecast. Now we're into Sunday PM, just afternoon here. You notice showers potentially starting in the Pacific Northwest, getting into the Willamette Valley. I will say they won't be as strong here on Sunday evening. I think some of the stronger rain, particularly for some dry areas in Oregon, will be more toward Tuesday. We'll get into that in just a second. An area that I do think will see some stronger precipitation, potentially even some storms here, is the Snake River Valley, particularly eastern Snake River Valley here, late Sunday, early Monday, perhaps some thunderstorms here in eastern Idaho, just as this low pressure system moves in just out ahead of that on late Sunday, early Monday morning. Could get some heavier precip into the upper Snake River Valley. Just kind of off to the west coast of Oregon, what you're actually seeing here is the kind of upper level trough proper work into the area. I mentioned expecting some of that heavier precip for the Willamette Valley on Tuesday. That's connected to that upper level trough here in the Willamette Valley, situating over Oregon, more so Monday PM and early Tuesday. That brings in more heavier precipitation forecast versus when that cold front just initially pushed through on Sunday PM. This is going to be, I think, important rainfall. We talked about some of that drought classification inching into parts of Oregon, some kind of general dryness across the Pacific Northwest associated with lower rainfall amounts and some of those warmer temperatures that we've seen over the last 4 weeks. This will be, I think rainfall we'll want to capitalize on across the Pacific Northwest. I'm taking this out through Tuesday, now looking at Tuesday PM. Potentially could see shower activity, even some thunderstorms lingering across this whole area. It will be colder than average, both those overnight lows and those daytime high temperatures. It's going to be more of a cold rain type of situation, but I think welcomed for some of these areas that have had that lingering dryness. What does this all look like in terms of those upper level height maps, getting an idea of where these troughs and ridges might be? If I take this and I make it valid on Wednesday evening here on the 14th, we can see that recent cold front that just moved through, bringing temperatures down finally in the Pacific Northwest. That's kind of skirting through the Canadian-American border there. As I walk this through into Thursday and Friday, we do get this little shortwave ridge moving through. That's going to bring temperatures back up toward normal in Washington and Oregon. I mentioned kind of getting out into Friday, they're even just above normal in some of those areas there. Still keeping that lingering troughing across the southern region of the West here. That subtropical jet still pushing into the area, keeping temperatures down across Southern California. Unfortunately, these areas have had persistent cold, cloudy weather for quite some time. As I take this forecast through Friday into Saturday, really watching for that Sunday cold front, there's that upper level trough coming really out of British Columbia, out of the Northeast Pacific, pretty amplified. It's a deep upper level trough, some really cold air there aloft. Diving into the area, settles over Oregon on Monday late, bringing those heavier precipitation chances to the Willamette Valley. While this trough is settled over the area, that's where we're kind of expecting inclement weather, daily shower and thunderstorm activity off to the east of it, and potentially even underneath the trough here in Oregon, parts of eastern Washington that have had that lingering dryness. This will keep temperatures down really across the west underneath the influence of this trough, all the way, I think, from Seattle through Southern California. And I'll take this out even, let's go to the end of the week here. Typically don't want to take these forecasts out too far because we start to lose predictability in that kind of 7 to 10 day window. But you'll notice not a huge change. If anything, we kind of get this retrograding action where the trough wants to situate just off the coast of California. That would keep, I think, temperatures down across much of the western region. Potentially, as a result of this ridge kind of trying to nose into British Columbia, could bring temperatures back up in parts of Washington and Idaho, but largely colder, I think, across the west if we do have this troughing lingering around near California and Oregon. This would also increase the chances downstream from this trough of precipitation into parts of the interior Mountain West. I think that would include the Snake River Valley here and potentially parts of eastern Washington and eastern Oregon if this forecast here comes to fruition. This is all the way 10 days out now. We're looking at June 24th, all the way out into next Saturday, not this Saturday. Hard to forecast anything with too much confidence or to get too local, but at least under this solution here from the GFS, that would be the predominant pattern here. I'll just take this over right now. Take a look at the ECMWF pattern for Saturday, June 24th. This is what I mean by variability when we get out 10 to 10 days here. We still see that ridge nosing into parts of British Columbia, likely keeping Washington, maybe even parts of Oregon colder. But that retrograding trough we just talked about is now well off the California coastline. That would lose some influence there, perhaps bringing some warmer temperatures into Southern California and Arizona. That's why I mentioned it's hard to get too specific when we get out beyond that 7 to 10 day forecast time period. Sometimes when we have some variability, we look at ensembles. These are a number of different model runs initialized with slightly different initial conditions. It gives us a sense of kind of the spread in the forecast. When we plug in those and we look at the GFS ensemble just for the jet stream, looking all the way out in kind of that 10-day time frame, we do see kind of general troughiness just off the coast of California coming out of the Pacific in terms of that jet stream, leading me to believe, on average, at least looking at these forecasts here, colder weather more likely for the central part of the West region here, potentially some increased precip for parts of the Intermountain West. But again, lower confidence on that forecast right now, given some of the spread that we just saw in the models. Jump over and look at the European ensemble for that same time frame. We'll go ahead and see if the 12Z run is in here this morning. It is not. We'll look at the 0Z or that kind of June 24th, June 26th time frame. And we do see some general troughiness off of California, but you'll notice this one ever so slightly shifted to the west. Could be some implications in that for the forecast, bringing more precipitation into potentially parts of Oregon, Northern California, even Washington, if this European solution comes to fruition. So some spread there out past 10 days. That is not uncommon. If we look at the Climate Prediction Center over that kind of same time frame, this is looking, the 6 to 10 day forecast here, looking out toward the end of next week. So June 20th through the 24th, kind of ending the work week there. We mentioned that troughing moving into the area, kind of starting with that cold front on Sunday. Not a surprise to see them going colder, I should say, for much of the western region, kind of the bullseye over the Salt Lake area, but virtually the entire west, from Seattle through Southern California, all the way over into parts of western Colorado, colder across the western region over this time frame. That precipitation kind of focused along and underneath that upper level trough that's moving into the area that we talked about. As it kind of moves in, that precipitation will be biased out ahead of it. We talked about some of that in eastern Idaho. But as that settles into the area, we could even get some precip underneath that upper level trough in the form of showers, cold showers in Oregon and Washington area, as we mentioned, has been dry. Take a closer look at some of these municipalities and their year-to-date precipitation. This is specifically for Salem, Oregon now. These little blue bars you can see here at the bottom, that is kind of our yearly, not yearly, but our daily rainfall amounts this year. That yearly amount is this black bar here that's been accruing rainfall since January 1st. So earlier in the year, we had more of an average precipitation trend, getting us back up to normal by early April here. But since then, we've had that warmer, drier pattern, and we haven't recorded many rainfall events in really the last 6 weeks here for Salem, Oregon. And we're now running a deficit of about 4 to 5 inches based on what we typically are at this time of year. That's that black curved line. Now, what's relevant here is we do have some forecast precipitation. So I think it'd be important to capitalize on some of that to get us back toward normal in terms of precipitation. Typically in summer, we're talking about the Pacific Northwest, eastern Washington area. We live in the Willamette Valley here in Oregon. Not a ton of precipitation to be had in summer. So it is a time when we typically see drier conditions and potentially could see some warmer weather here this summer. If we jump over and look at eastern Washington, this is looking for Pullman, Washington, home of Washington State University, and the Palouse. Even drier than what we just looked at in the Willamette Valley. Didn't have that big run of precipitation earlier this year that the Willamette Valley had. We've seen some sporadic precipitation events, but nothing particularly heavy. And as such, we're running a bigger 5+ inch deficit here in mid-June. They have some forecast precipitation as well that we just looked at, so it'd be nice to capitalize on some of that, get closer to normal here. Doubt we'll be making the jump up back to normal based on what was in the forecast that we just looked at. If we look longer term out, really kind of getting into July at this point. This is looking at the ECMWF weeklies, really kind of the monthly forecast for the beginning part of July, looking at really the 30 days starting June 20th, all the way out to July 20th. In terms of temperatures, we see the influence of that kind of colder, persistent pattern across the west that we really just talked about a little bit in the forecast, encompassing more of the entire western region. I think we're seeing some of that here, where we're not seeing big temperature anomalies poking into the west here, signaling that we might be looking at a reduced chance of heat waves. We did in the forecast see some sense of, at least in maybe the European ensemble, warmth trying to push back into northern Washington. I think that would be more limited to areas in the far northern west region, but really California, Nevada, Arizona, not seeing a ton of warmth, save for parts of the desert southwest. There has been some kind of hint that we could get an upper level high pressure system moving into there, really a ridge, bringing temperatures up in eastern Arizona. That has the potential to kind of settle into this area as we're expecting a weakened monsoon, perhaps warmer temperatures in July for parts of the desert southwest. The story is precipitation over that same time period. We do see these kind of higher than normal amounts forecasted here for eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, parts of Idaho. This is kind of step one on the precipitation color bar here. So not expecting widespread precipitation here in that kind of June 20th to July 20th timeframe. In fact, I think what we're seeing on this forecast is that trend we just saw on the 7-day forecast, kind of that 7 to 14-day forecast. Some of that anomalous precipitation here captured in this weekly forecast. I don't think we're going to be in this kind of persistent wet pattern beyond that into early July, which will be important. This area has been dry. We just looked at some of the city year-to-date precipitations for some areas embedded in here. So it'll be important to capitalize on some of this early precip if we do, in fact, shift drier on the other side of this kind of pattern change here. Now, as far as the long-term forecast and the story, sea surface temperatures, this picture here, this sea surface temperature map I'm showing you is valid actually in early May of this year. And I want to give you a look at this to see how things have changed just in the last 5 to 6 weeks or so. We talked earlier this year about this negative PDO signature, this cold water here off the west coast of North America, that we think influenced a number of these troughs pushing into the area, the colder weather we experienced across the western region. As we went through the time frame, we have lost some of this colder signature in the northeast Pacific. I'll jump over and look at the current sea surface temperatures valid as of yesterday. Again, sea surface temperature anomalies, so how they're departing from their average for this time of year. We see warmer waters moving into the northeast Pacific. That has allowed ridges to build into this area at times, or at least allowed Washington, parts of Idaho, parts of northern Oregon to be warmer than average. But we've seen this kind of cold patch lingering off California, extending out into the Pacific, thinking that that has influenced that colder than average pattern across the southern western region of the U.S. Now, as I kind of shift back between these two, you'll notice that we have eroded that cold patch in the north, certainly, but we've even begun a little bit on the edges here to erode this cold patch, particularly more off the coast of Mexico just in the last few weeks here. So we do expect this kind of negative PDO signature, negative PMM, whatever you want to call it, as El Niño strengthens in the Pacific. It is expected that this will begin to erode somewhat, and we might lose the grip of that influence on the temperatures out west, where we've seen that colder, persistent pattern in parts of California, Arizona, and Nevada. Now, these water temperatures aren't going to warm up by the weekend. They're not going to warm up even by the end of June. It's something that takes, anywhere from 6 weeks or beyond. But perhaps getting through July, we'll start to lose the influence of this colder weather here that has been really persistent, certainly in California, especially along the coastal areas where some areas are running huge deficits and sort of accruing temperatures for areas like Oxnard, Santa Maria, further north even up into Salinas and further south through San Diego County. A lot of May gray, a lot of these kind of persistent misty showers as a result of this colder temperature here in the ocean surface. Last big storyline I want to cover for this video here, El Niño. The last time we talked on Wednesday, Thursday morning, the Climate Prediction Center from NOAA officially initiated an El Niño advisory. Essentially what this means is officially from NOAA, El Niño has begun in the Pacific. It's something we have talked about every video, I think, this year. The probability of El Niño increasing, right, as we went into the summer for the Pacific. It's finally upon us as we've crossed throughout that threshold, according to the Climate Prediction Center. I don't think this is huge news. It's huge news kind of in accounting sense, means it's something we forecasted and expected, but we've really seen the influence, I think, of that El Niño over the last few weeks. And even if I jump over to some of the forecasts I was showing earlier, we have the Pacific jet stream well up here into the North Pacific. We sometimes call that the polar jet stream, but we've seen this southern component of the jet stream, what we call the subtropical jet stream, really cranking from Hawaii into California. It has at times pushed up into the Intermountain West, helping to promote that kind of daily shower and thunderstorm activity we saw in late May. So we've been kind of noticing that El Niño trend in the atmosphere, I think, over the last few weeks. We've just kind of officially, now in that kind of an accounting sense, have initiated El Niño status in the Pacific. And they even mentioned that in their El Niño advisory, that El Niño probably really started at some point in May. So it's been accounted for in the forecast. And it doesn't change things significantly, at least for our forecast going forward, that we are officially in El Niño. that is all I have for you all this evening. Thank you for watching.